All right, welcome to U.S. history. Sorry, it's not the regular video format, but this will still help you get going. Here we go. We're on chapter 12, Age of Reform. So, write down some of this, take some notes. If you remember, we had the first Great Awakening. Now we have the second Great Awakening. And again, it's big revivals and people. There's no Netflix. If you remember, stories and just hanging out was the entertainment, and so people are gonna come to these mass gatherings to be inspired. And a big part of the Second Great Awakening is free will. So before this, the dominant idea was that you were predestined to be either good or bad, to go to heaven or hell, something along those lines. During the Second Great Awakening, we have the concept of free will, that you get to make choices. And so you're going to have to see how this Second Great Awakening, it's sort of the seed, and out of this seed flowers a bunch of reform movements. That's why this is called the Age of Reform. Okay? And so, if you've really taken hold of this religious fervor, how will we know? Well, you'll want to improve yourself and you'll want to improve society. And so you'll have the temperance movement, which is a movement away from alcohol, and that'll eventually lead to prohibition, which is the banning of alcohol. You'll want to improve your education and education of all the people here in the country, and you'll want to ban slavery. Abolitionist movement means we want to abolish slavery. And then if you don't know who Harriet Tubman is, she's very famous. She's a conductor on the Underground Railroad, and this is a movement to get slaves out of the South and into the North. So if you need to pause it and write stuff down in your notes, go for it. Otherwise, we're going to keep going. Okay, what's the Second Great Awakening? Changing religious ideas, or I almost think of it as like a wave. So you had the First Great Awakening, and that wave is sort of calmed down, and now you have the Second Great Awakening, and out of the Second Great Awakening, we'll get a lot of new denominations in the churches there. What's the temperance movement? Effort to end alcohol abuse. What's the Underground Railroad? Network of people that help slaves reach freedom. It's people, it's pathways, it's knowledge, it's buildings, it's sort of the whole system to escape the slavery in the South. So if you remember back, what happened during the age of Jackson that made politics more fair or more accessible to people? Okay, what's that word that means the right to vote? Suffrage, all right, expanding suffrage. So before we were talking about dropping the property requirement. In a minute, we'll be talking about women getting the right to vote. If you look on the map on page 412 in your book, which I hope you do, you will see that America is expanding west. We are well past the Appalachians now, but we're also sort of separating between manufacturing and agriculture, and that's going to be a big deal. So life is changing. How so? What's the big thing that's changing life right now? Go ahead, take a guess. You got it. The Industrial Revolution. All right. People are becoming part of the machine, for lack of a better word. We have gone from what they call the cottage industry, where you decide what time you're going to wake up, you decide the production schedule of the day, to the factory system, where now you need to keep up with the pace of industry and things like that. What's the first power source in the Industrial Revolution? Water. What's the second one? Steam. Why does that matter? What does steam allow you to do that water wouldn't let you do? It allows you to move the factories to cities. This is going to let, or create an environment where the jobs are in the cities, and now people are going to, run into the cities for work, and they're not really prepared for all of that. Okay, so Second Great Awakening. Predestination, God decides your fate. The Second Great Awakening is about free will. Your actions determine your fate. So know what the free will is? Charles Finney is one of the more powerful preachers, okay? He's logical, he's emotional, his outdoor meetings lasted days, and so people will come from all around and get fired up. Okay, the burned over district is in upstate New York, and out of this area, as far as the map is concerned, it's not that large of an area, but it'll have a large impact. You will get a lot of different denominations from this one area. A lot of people are really going to start their own churches and start their own religious journey, we'll say. So take a look at this image. What do you see here? This is sort of a primary source. This is a primary source. Give you a minute to look at that. Okay, yeah. One side on the left, you're going to hell, it looks like, and on the right, you're going to heaven. And so you have the choice. And when you have the choice, what's that referring to? Free will. Okay, that's what free will means. And so if you make these good choices as an individual, then the whole society will benefit. Okay, if you improve yourself, you can improve the community, and eventually you will arrive at a place called Utopia, which is an imagined place of perfection. So you will see these different religious groups, they're going to strive for utopia. Now most of these religious groups are going to fail, and they're not going to last very long. But some of their utopian influences make it through. So even though the group doesn't survive till this day, the 8-hour workday, or some idea about equality, or the craftsmanship. Remember we talked about interchangeable parts, and maybe you're just making one part per day. Well, what about craftsmanship? And the people that come to mind for me are the Amish. Okay.
So, seeing no future for his plans in Britain, Owen took his revolutionary ideas where most revolutionaries at the time did.
Indiana, 1825. A great experiment was unfolding on the banks of the Wabash River. It was called New Harmony, and it would be a community of equality, heralding a new way of life, and eventually a new kind of world. People took Owen seriously. When he arrived in America in 1825, a joint session of Congress was convened to hear his ideas. Before an audience that included President James Monroe and President-elect John Quincy Adams, Owen announced he had purchased an entire village in Indiana. There, he would further the work begun at New Lanark. But this time, his community would be one of true equality. On April 27, 1825, Robert Owen welcomed 800 eager arrivals to the town he had rechristened New Harmony. One group in particular was attracted to New Harmony: intellectuals. The village soon became a center of progressive thought and experiment. To coincide with the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in July 1826, Owen issued what he saw as the next step in the liberation of humankind: the Declaration of Mental Independence. From here forward, he proclaimed, man was free from the trinity of evils responsible for all the world's misery and vice: traditional religion, conventional marriage, and private property. The last of these was key. The quest to do away with private property would animate socialism for the next 150 years. Before long, many members were losing their enthusiasm for the experiment.
Ultimately, you had a lot of thinkers and not enough doers.
The work simply didn't get done. After 2 years, several reorganizations, and 7 different constitutions, Owen's great experiment collapsed. Despite the failure of New Harmony and other early attempts to put socialism into practice, the idea continued to generate great excitement. Soon, 2 philosophers would take utopian hope and turn it into faith by arguing that socialism was not only desirable, it was inevitable.
All right, so welcome back. 2 things I want to talk about with that video is, one, look how old those people are. Look how far back that is. Hey, do we still have a battle of socialism and capitalism today? We do. And did we have it 100 years ago, or even longer than 100 years ago? We did. And so their critique was too many thinkers and not enough doers, and that is a valid critique, okay? So, and the critique of capitalism would be that too few people end up with too much wealth. Is that a valid criticism? Sure. I'm not here to tell you which one to like or which one not to like. I'm just here to tell you that these things have been going on, and history doesn't often repeat itself, but it often rhymes, is what Mark Twain would say. All right, so we have this movement, the Second Great Awakening. How do I know that you're a part of the Second Great Awakening? Because you're going to want to stop alcohol and the abuse of alcohol and things like that. That's called the temperance movement, okay? Of all the stuff you see on the slide, temperance movement and how it leads to prohibition. Those are the words I want you to know, okay? Because we're eventually going to have an amendment that bans alcohol, okay? But if you on the fringe, not saying it's not as important, but a little bit less important, but we'll want prison reform, and we won't want the mentally ill to be treated, we'll want them to have treatment, not necessarily punishment, okay? So society's, I guess evolving is the right word, we're looking for better solutions. Reform, okay? Society's reforming itself. Education reforms, here we go. You didn't have a lot of public school, but now we're going to want to have public school. Quality of education equals quality of citizen. Look at that. In the South, slaves were forbidden to read. That's part of those slave codes, if you remember that. Okay, you can't teach a slave to read and write because they would worry that would improve their communication skills, which would lead to more rebellion. So, and in the North, you're gonna teach everybody. Page 420 and 421 is about school. I highly recommend you read it. In case you don't, you'll see the dunce cap, and we'll just say that your school is a little different than what it used to be. Okay, vocab word. Make sure you know abolitionist. I'm going to try to use this little marker thing. Let's see if this even works. Hey, it kind of worked, right? All right, abolitionist. Good vocab word. Okay, you want to abolish slavery. Notice too, in the North, they're abolishing slavery well before the Civil War. That's 50, 60, 70 years in Pennsylvania before the Civil War. Even more, what is that? 80 years almost. What I want to say though is there's not the need for slavery in the North because you can't grow what? You can't grow cotton in the North like you can in the South. Okay. Oh, is that a question on here? Perfect. Why is it easier to abolish slavery in the North? Because of physical geography, human geography, okay? The physical geography of the North does not allow for certain crops to grow. Okay, this is a big deal. Big deal, little deal, no deal. This is big deal. William Garrison, okay? He is going to have a publication called The Liberator. So I want you to know who this guy is and what his newspaper is called and what his contribution to the anti-slavery movement is. So what was The Liberator? An anti-slavery publication. Okay, people read it and maybe you're on the fence. Maybe you're like, oh, I don't like slavery, but I'm not going to do anything about it. I don't really care. It doesn't affect me. Well, you read this newspaper and you hear the horrors of slavery and then you go, no, 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 no. I'm getting off the bench. I'm getting in the game. I want to stop slavery. Does that make sense? It motivates people in the North to want to stop slavery. Who started the Anti-Slavery Society? We just talked about him. I'm going back real quick. Oh, doesn't let me go back. William Garrison. Awesome. Make sure you know William Garrison, Liberator, anti-slavery. Put all those three things together and you'll be good to go. Okay, attached will be a section from the Liberator.
But scattered around the country, a few lonely souls were convinced that slavery was a crime against God and man. And in Boston, one of them was coming to understand that God intended he do something about it. William Lloyd Garrison felt that he was destined to do great things, but he had no idea how to get there. In 1828, he was 22 years old, newly arrived in the city from his hometown of Newburyport. Garrison's father, a seaman and a drunk, had abandoned the family when Garrison was 2 years old. Plunged into poverty, Garrison's mother left her children for years on end as she looked for work. But in their time together, she managed to drum a fierce Christian conscience into her son.
William Lloyd Garrison's religious background was not just a background. It was at the core of who he was. It was an indwelling spirit inside of him that constantly thought about making God's will come into being on this earth.
Shortly after arriving in Boston, Garrison happened to meet an itinerant publisher who was raising money for his one-man anti-slavery newspaper. Garrison was horrified by descriptions of the slave pens where men, women, and children were held awaiting shipment further south. And he began to think that ending slavery was the cause that could give meaning to his life.
Okay, Fredrick Douglass. He is going to be a very powerful speaker. He's born a slave. He tries to run away, but is caught. There'll be a primary source. I can't I strongly recommend that you read it. I cannot, emphasize that enough. This is where the real history is. I want you to read this man's words. I don't want to give it away, but it's a heartfelt. It's strange. You got to read it to understand the emotional impact of his life. So please read the Fredrick Douglass primary source that's attached in Google Classroom. Anyway, he runs away to New York, and he is going to go out in public. And again, some people are on the fence. Some people care. Oh yeah, I don't like slavery, but I'm not going to do anything about it. They listen to him speak, and then they feel just how bad slavery is. They feel the emotion. I don't know. I'm trying to tell you, they start doing something. Okay, these people are building the wave to where that we're going to want to get rid of slavery. Okay.
Douglass's life sort of stands across the expanse of the 19th century as a symbol of the worst and the best in the American character. He was the slave who saw most of the worst brutalities of slavery. He was the slave, however, who freed himself and by luck, pluck, and gifts remade himself. Most importantly, he had an enormous ability to capture in words the meaning of what America is about.
I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. By far the larger part of the slaves know as little of their ages as horses know of theirs, and it is the wish of most masters within my knowledge to keep their slaves thus ignorant. I do not remember to have ever met a slave who could tell of his birthday. Fredrick Douglass, 1845.
It was along the eastern shore of Maryland near a quiet creek called the Tuckahoe that the life of the man who would inspire a nation began.
Fredrick Douglass was born in Talbot County on Maryland's eastern shore. He wasn't certain of his birth himself. In fact, he thought that he had been born in 1817.
But slave records tell of the birth of Frederick Augustus to a slave named Harriet in February 1818.
He knew who his mother was, although she was a distant figure in his life. She lived on another plantation. He never really knew who his father was, although he came to believe that his father was definitely a white man and probably his master.
Raised by his grandmother at the far end of the plantation, the tiny boy named Frederick led a carefree, playful life along the muddy shores of the Tuckahoe until he was 6.
At about age 6, Douglass found that his childhood had come to an abrupt end. He was assigned to act as the companion and caretaker of the child of the owner of the plantation. And as a result, he could get in trouble for things that he either had done or had failed to do. And so it became immediately apparent that he was no longer a child, but was a slave and was part of that institution of slavery.
Watching that video, it's sad. You don't even know what your birthday is. I mean, these are the little things that we take for granted, that freedom, I guess, gives you, or, that life gives you. Everybody knows their birthday. It's that makes me sad. Anyway, back to class. Here we go. Underground Railroad. It's a secret network. Oh yeah, you got to write this down. In fact, I'm switching over to purple. Let's see if this purple thing works. Remember, this is the first time I've used it. Oh, there it is. Underground Railroad. All right. Secret network of people, rooms, and paths used to help slaves escape to the north. So you might know the trail that gets you around the thing, that gets you over and stuff like that, or you might have to hide in an attic. It is not a real railroad. Every year someone gets that wrong on the test. The Underground Railroad is not an actual choo-choo, okay? It's not like, chugga chugga choo-choo. No. It's just like a code word for the people that'll help you, or the attic you can get stuffed into to wait so the slave catchers pass you by, and then you can take the secret trail, okay? Underground Railroad. Make sure you know what that is. and also take a look at it on the map. And by the way, which direction are you heading? Mostly north, okay? Mostly north. Harriet Tubman is the most famous conductor on the Underground Railroad. She escapes from slavery and then goes back to help others. This is where I have to give her all the props in the world. I feel like if I was enslaved and I escaped, I might just keep running. I might just keep going north. I might not turn around and go back to help other people because, you know, it's in such abysmal conditions, and if you get caught, you'd be punished. And so you got to give her all the props in the world. She was very brave to go back and help others.
3 miles outside Baltimore heading north, a slave on the run. The risk of capture is high. At most, 1,000 a year are successful. Ears cut off, Achilles tendons slashed, branding, all are common punishments if caught. Fredrick Douglass has failed twice, but won't let that stop him. Men like Douglass are the South's worst nightmare. He has a better chance than most of passing as a free man. Unlike 80% of slaves, he can read and write.
Even in the 21st century, we're only 3 or 4 generations away from people that not only could not get paid for their labor, it was against the law for them to read and write, it was against the law for them to marry, it was against the law for them to name their children after themselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, please. Long way to go.
Black Americans must carry documents proving they're free or who they belong to. Fredrick Douglass has papers borrowed from a friend. They won't hold up to careful examination.
My whole future depended on the decision of this conductor. This moment of time was one of the most anxious I ever experienced. Had he looked closely at the paper, he could not have failed to discover that it called for a very different looking person from myself.
Fredrick Douglass makes it to New York City and freedom, and becomes a leading figure in the anti-slavery movement. He'll write a best-selling autobiography. He'll meet and debate with Lincoln in the White House. At a time when slaves are barely regarded as people, he will become an icon, a celebrity, the best-known African-American in America. The best hope for escaped slaves is the legendary Underground Railroad and the tireless efforts of Harriet Tubman. An escaped slave herself, she risks her life returning south again and again to guide others to freedom. A masterful escape artist, Tubman will do anything to avoid capture, even keeping babies quiet with opium.
Harriet Tubman is the Moses of our people. She was a wanted woman. She was a hated woman, reviled by the white South. Just imagine you have gotten out of slavery, you've escaped, and yet you come back. You have the courage and the care about other people to come back into a hell.
The South puts a $40,000 reward on her head, but nothing stops her.
Come on, yo! Come on! Move. I'm going to die.
Tubman is one of America's first civil rights activists. In the same month she dies, Rosa Parks is born. Fredrick Douglass and Harriet Tubman threaten everything the South stands for.
Tens of thousands of slave owners had to deal with, for the first time, the fact that these people are going to rebel. She was far more effective as the symbol that they feared than the few hundred that she saved.
Nearly 60,000 slaves will escape, up to a $50 million loss to their owners. But it symbolizes much more. Now the South has a fight on its hands, and they're prepared to do whatever it takes to preserve their way of life. The fight